This is Eun-Ju Ryu, a researcher at Convergence Education Institute. I would like to make a new proposal to practice modeling education. So I will present the implications of perceiving the ignorance of model in science education. In recent science education, model and modeling education has been emphasized. Models are described in different areas according to the modeler's purpose and intention, and have limitations in explaining. This is because the model has not only areas that can be explained, but also areas that can be explained. That is ignorance. The ignorance of the model corresponds to the nature of the model. Therefore, in order to properly understand the phenomenon, various models are needed. Most students think that there is one model that is more comprehensive and more explanatory than the others for explaining phenomenon, or there are only one model that explains the phenomenon. This is a lack of understanding of the nature of the model and corresponds to a low level of meta-modeling knowledge. For modeling, it is necessary above all to realize the limitations of the model and to understand that various models coexist rather than a single model to explain phenomena. This is possible when perceiving the ignorance of the model. The meaning and value of ignorance of the model was not considered important in science education. This study aims to suggest the value and importance of the ignorance of the model, focusing on the Arrhenius model and the Frenstead-Lowry model, which are acid-base models in chemistry subjects. Since ignorance determines the boundaries of knowledge and knowing, ignorance perception is necessary to know the domain of knowledge. Feinstein describes ignorance as a specific state of knowledge in general. In the absence of facts, understanding, insights, or clarity about something, with no data or existing data not leading to a consistent explanation. Science education needs a change that deals with the nature of science, not science knowledge, and that change can be made from subject-centered learning to education dealing with ignorance. Let me explain the nature of the model. The model is not simply a representation, but reflects the cognitive process of the cognitive agent and reflects the purpose and intention of the modeler. And there is no single model to explain a phenomenon, and the method of reasoning may vary, and the selected phenomenon is determined according to the specific intention and purpose of the modeler. Therefore, the model that explains the phenomenon has its limitations and has the nature of being diverse. Scientists extract common properties among many properties of nature during the modeling process, and in this process, some phenomena are not selected and ignored. This part corresponds to the red area that cannot be clearly illuminated by the model and corresponds to the ignorance of the model. Domain of ignorance. First, ignorance is perceived in an inconstant context in explaining a phenomenon with model knowledge, which is a limitation of the model. Meta-ignorance is perceived when same phenomena are explained by the other model and corresponds to an area that cannot be described with a model. Perceiving ignorance of the model are divided into three stages. First stage is simply understanding model knowledge without perceiving the ignorance of the model. The next stage is that the limitations of the model are known through the ignorance perceived in an inconsistent context. The last stage is to know that other models explain the phenomenon, but the same phenomenon cannot be explained with the model. This is to perceive the meta-ignorance of the model and reveals the diversity of models. Next is the research questions. What is the level of perceiving the ignorance of the XD-based models by chemistry education major pre-service teachers? What are implications of perceiving the ignorance of model in science education? Participants. This study was conducted with 12 free service teachers enrolled in the first grade of the chemistry education department of a teacher training university located in the central region of Korea. Instruments. The questionnaire asked whether it is possible to explain the 6 contexts related to acid-base dissociation with the Arrhenius model and Bronsted-Lowry model, respectively. In the consistent context of the model, we try to check whether they understand knowledge of the model. In the inconsistent context of the model, we tried to find out perceiving ignorance of the model. In inexplicable context, we tried to find out whether they perceive meta-ignorance of the model. This is the result of the analysis. In the stage of knowledge understanding, 4 people did not understand both models. 4 people understood one of the 2 models. None of them understood the Arrhenius model, but 4 people understood the Bronsted-Lowry model. 4 people understood both models. That is, 12 people were in the model understanding stage. In the ignorance perception stage, 5 people perceived only one model's ignorance. However, only one of them perceived in the ignorance of the Bronsted-Lowry model. Also, there was no level of perceiving both models' ignorance. In the meta-ignorance perception stage, 7 people were assigned to the level of perceiving the ignorance and meta-ignorance of one model. However, only one of them was in the case of the Bronsted-Lowry model. There was no level of perceiving both models' meta-ignorance. Result and findings. A majority of pre-service teachers remained at the stage of knowledge understanding. This shows they does not realize the limitations of model and diversity of the model. Therefore, for modeling education, educational efforts to deal with the nature of the model are needed for free service teachers. The ratio of perceiving the ignorance of the Bronsted-Lowry model was lower than that of the Arrhenius model. This is because the relationship between models is viewed as a comprehensive development. Therefore, since each model has an ignorance, it is necessary to deal with the viewpoint that various models are needed. Limitations and implication. This study analyzed the perception of ignorance of the acid-base model in chemistry subjects, so studies are needed to apply to other subjects. However, in order to eliminate the value of the ignorance of model in science education, it is meaningful to propose the ignorance perception stage. Thank you for listening.